Ethan Hale had always believed loyalty was the foundation of everything, in business, in friendship, in marriage. He wasn't a romantic fool. He just thought that when people gave you their word, they meant it. For 15 years, he had built Hale Tech from nothing. The first office was his apartment kitchen, where he and his two best friends, Liam and Claire, spent nights eating cheap takeout while coding. Claire had been his girlfriend then, later his wife, and Liam had been the guy Ethan trusted enough to make co-founder. They were a family, or at least Ethan thought so. By the time Ethan was 38, Hale Tech had grown into a respectable software firm with 50 employees, steady contracts, an upcoming deal that could double their valuation overnight. Ethan was finally breathing easier, thinking the sacrifices had been worth it. But then came the accident. It was raining that night. Ethan had stayed late at the office, finalizing presentations for potential investors. The other two had already left. On the way home, a delivery truck ran a red light. Ethan's car was totaled. He woke up in the hospital with 2 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and doctors telling him he'd need at least 6 weeks to recover. That's when the vultures started circling. From his hospital bed, Ethan tried to stay involved, emailing, calling, giving instructions. But Claire kept telling him, "Don't worry, I'll handle things. You need to focus on healing." Liam said the same. 3 weeks later, he was discharged. He came home to a house that felt different. Claire seemed distant. Liam stopped answering his texts as quickly. The air was thick with something Ethan couldn't name yet. It all became clear when Ethan went to the office for the first time after the accident. His name was gone from the glass wall, literally removed. Inside, the employees wouldn't meet his eyes. His access card didn't work. When he finally cornered one of the junior staff, the kid stammered, "I'm so sorry. I thought you knew." Knew what? The answer came from a lawyer's letter waiting in his mailbox that evening. Claire and Liam had used a clause in the partnership agreement, one Ethan had stupidly signed years ago, to vote him out of the company. They had claimed he was unfit to serve due to medical incapacity, and had bought out his shares at a laughably low valuation. The ink was already dry. His wife had been sleeping with his best friend for months. They had taken his company, and they left him with nothing but a modest payout that barely covered the hospital bills. The divorce papers arrived a week later. For months, Ethan spiraled. He sold his house, moved into a cramped apartment, drank too much, stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., replaying every conversation, every moment he'd trusted them. But there was one thing Claire and Liam didn't understand about Ethan Hale. He could be patient, and patience, in the right hands, could be a weapon sharper than any blade. The night he signed the divorce papers, Ethan made himself a promise. He didn't know how yet, but one day they would lose everything they had taken from him. And when it happened, they wouldn't even see his hand in it until it was too late. Daniel woke up earlier than usual, not because he had anywhere urgent to be, but because for the first time in weeks, he had a plan. The kind of plan that doesn't need to be shouted or even whispered. It grows quietly, like vines in the dark, until it's wrapped around everything. He wasn't rushing into anything. That's what Adrian would expect, what Melissa would laugh about over a glass of wine. Oh, Daniel? He's probably still crying in his apartment, scrolling through my Instagram. No, Daniel wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of thinking he was broken. He started small. The first step was information. People underestimate just how much you can find out when you're patient, when you don't confront, but instead observe. Melissa had locked down her social media, but not enough. She still posted on her story for her close friends, not realizing Daniel was still on that list. Every overpriced dinner, every charity gala, every rooftop party Adrian dragged her to, Daniel screenshot everything. It wasn't jealousy, not anymore. It was reconnaissance. He learned their routines. Adrian's law firm kept him out late on Thursdays. Melissa's Pilates class was at 10 a.m. every Tuesday. She'd grab coffee afterward at the same spot, a cozy little cafe 2 blocks from their penthouse. Daniel started going there too, always sitting in the far corner with a book, never making eye contact. Just another customer. And slowly, the universe started giving him more than he could have asked for. One morning, Melissa walked in, talking to a friend. Daniel didn't need to hear every word. The The tone was enough. Frustration, stress, something about Adrian being controlling. And I don't even know if this is what I wanted. A tiny crack. Daniel knew cracks could be widened. He began laying the groundwork, not directly, but through proximity. He ran into people from their social circle, old acquaintances from events Melissa used to drag him to. He never badmouthed her, never spoke of betrayal. Instead, he acted as though he was doing fine, even thriving. People are curious about quiet confidence. They talk. He made sure some of those conversations would get back to Melissa. It worked. 2 weeks later, he got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's been a while. How have you been?" Melissa. Daniel stared at it for a long time before replying with a simple, "Doing well, thanks." "You?" No emojis, no warmth, just enough to be polite. The next day, she messaged again, longer this time, asking if they could catch up just as friends. He didn't answer for 2 days. Let her wait. When he finally replied, it was, "Sure, next week. I'm busy until then." He wasn't busy at all. They met at that same cafe. Melissa looked different. Polished, yes, but there was a tension in her smile. She talked about how crazy life had been, how she missed their old routines. She didn't mention Adrian much, and when she did, there was a flicker in her eyes that Daniel recognized, the same flicker she'd had in their last months together. He let her talk, said little. People fill silence with truths they don't mean to share. That night, Daniel wrote down everything she'd said, every small complaint about Adrian, every moment her voice dropped when she spoke about her new life. He was building a map, not of places, but of weaknesses, and he had just found the first pressure point. But the real opportunity came unexpectedly. A week later, he got a message from an old contact, a man named Vincent, who used to work with Adrian. Vincent didn't like Adrian. Apparently, no one who worked under him did. The man was brilliant, but arrogant, manipulative, and careless with people's trust. Vincent had something Daniel didn't. Access. Over drinks. Vincent mentioned rumors. Shady deals Adrian had been involved in, questionable clients. Gray area. Transactions that could sink him if the wrong people found out. Daniel didn't even have to ask for details. Vincent offered them freely, under the pretense of warning him. When Daniel left the bar that night, he didn't feel anger anymore. He felt control. For the first time since the betrayal, he was no longer reacting. He was moving the pieces. And Adrian didn't even know the game had started. Daniel had been living in New York for 6 months now. 6 months of moving pieces, subtle plays, and a dangerous kind of patience. Evelyn didn't know it, but every step of her glittering new life had been shadowed by him. The first month after her wedding to Victor Price had been a social media parade. Champagne toasts, luxury vacations, her wearing dresses worth more than their old apartment. Daniel had watched every post, not because he missed her, but because each one was a breadcrumb leading him into her new world. By the second month, her feed had slowed. The smiles looked tighter, the captions shorter. Victor wasn't appearing in every photo anymore. By the third month, Daniel had already planted seeds in the shadows. He had reconnected with a college acquaintance, Martin Cho, a quiet but well-connected consultant who worked for several of Victor's competitors. Martin had been more than happy to feed him inside gossip in exchange for some anonymous intel Daniel had dug up about a rival company. By month 4, Daniel had started targeting Victor's world directly, not through loud, reckless moves. That would be too easy to detect. Instead, he became a ghost investor in one of Victor's supply partners. When Daniel quietly influenced that company to delay key shipments, Victor's newest luxury development stalled. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was irritating and costly. Daniel smiled when he learned that Victor's first big gala as Evelyn's husband had to be postponed. That gala had been her dream. She'd been telling friends it would be the event of the year. Small cracks. That's all Daniel needed. The rest would come on their own. One night, in early winter, Daniel saw her for the first time since the divorce. It wasn't planned. He had been at an upscale charity auction, blending into the crowd of donors, playing the role of a faceless attendee. When she walked in, Evelyn looked almost exactly as he remembered. Stunning, poised, with that polished smile she used like a weapon. But he noticed something new. Her eyes, they darted more than before. She scanned the room, not like someone looking for a friend, but like someone looking for trouble. Victor wasn't with her. Instead, she clung to the arm of a woman Daniel recognized from her social media. Madison Clark, the city's queen of high society gossip. It was during the auction that Evelyn's composure slipped. A painting, one she clearly wanted, went to a last-minute anonymous bidder. Daniel knew because that bidder was him. He didn't even want the art. He just wanted her to feel that invisible hand taking something from her, without knowing who or why. The real strike came 2 weeks later. Martin had fed Daniel a delicious piece of information. Victor's largest client, a European investor group, was nervous about his recent delays. A quiet rumor, properly placed, could spook them into pulling out of a deal worth millions. Daniel didn't place the rumor himself. That would be sloppy. Instead, he let it slip during a private conversation with a mutual acquaintance of Victor and the investors, knowing it would reach exactly the right ears. By the time the deal collapsed, Victor was furious, and Evelyn, her Instagram went silent for 9 days. When she finally posted again, it was just a picture of a coffee cup and a book, with a caption, "Some days, silence says more than words." Daniel almost laughed. She was crumbling in small, quiet ways, and she didn't even know who was behind it. But Daniel wasn't just breaking her financial comfort. He was going after her trust. A month later, Evelyn received an anonymous message. "Do you really know who you married?" Attached was a blurry photograph of Victor, alone in a dim hotel bar, talking to a brunette woman. Daniel didn't need to fake an affair. Victor was careless enough to provide the material himself. The photo had been taken by someone Daniel had paid to casually hang around that hotel during Victor's late-night meetings. Evelyn didn't post for 2 full weeks after that. The best part? Daniel was still invisible. Her paranoia was growing, but she had no face to blame. She'd never suspect a man she discarded was living less than 2 miles from her penthouse, moving like smoke through her new life. And this was only the midpoint. Because Daniel wasn't after quick revenge. He was building the kind of collapse that leaves nothing standing. By the time Ethan's partnership with Logan's company had been running for 2 months, Logan still thought he was untouchable. Every week, he bragged to clients about the mystery investor who had given him access to exclusive contracts and connections. He thought Ethan was just some eccentric businessman who wanted to play behind the scenes. But what Logan didn't know, and what made Ethan smile late at night, was that every single one of those contracts had an expiration date written in invisible ink. The deals were structured so that the moment any payment was delayed, even by a few hours, clauses would activate, penalties would skyrocket, and ownership rights would shift straight into Ethan's hands. And Logan was about to trigger every one of them. Ethan had been quietly manipulating Logan's cash flow, pushing certain payments earlier than necessary, delaying others with carefully timed clerical errors. Logan's accounts were becoming a tangled mess, but because business seemed booming, he didn't see the red flags. In the meantime, Ethan was tightening the emotional screws on Claire. She had moved into Logan's penthouse, thinking she was stepping into a fairy tale, but the reality was cracks were already forming. Logan was flashy, impatient, and far less charming when the cameras weren't on. Ethan had found subtle ways to make it worse. A few whispers to Logan's jealous ex about Claire's presence. Anonymous messages sent to tabloids hinting at Logan's wandering eye. Claire began noticing small articles online, gossip sites questioning Logan's fidelity. Logan denied everything, of course, but the seed of doubt was planted. The final stage of Ethan's plan required perfect timing. He needed Logan desperate and distracted, right when the financial trap snapped shut. And that's why Ethan decided to host a gala. It was an annual charity event run by one of Ethan's business contacts. A black-tie, high-profile gathering where the city's wealthiest mingled. Ethan arranged for Logan's company to be the official sponsor, paying the massive sponsorship fee in advance, but through an account that was about to vanish from under Logan's control. On the night of the gala, the ballroom glowed with gold and crystal light. Strings played softly, champagne flowed, and the press swarmed near the entrance. Logan, in his designer tuxedo, worked the room like a politician, introducing Claire to influential figures she'd only seen in magazines. Ethan stayed in the shadows at first, letting the evening build. At exactly 9:15 p.m., while Logan was on stage giving a speech about integrity in business, Ethan's lawyer pressed a single button on a secure laptop backstage. In that instant, Logan's bank accounts froze. Every contract he thought he owned flipped to Ethan's name. His sponsorship payment for the gala? Reversed, leaving the charity and the press furious. Logan didn't know it yet, but the moment he stepped off that stage, his entire empire would collapse. And Ethan would be waiting for him, ready to reveal who had orchestrated it all. Ethan stood in the dimly lit corner of the hotel ballroom, his champagne glass untouched in his hand. The gala was in full swing. The clink of glasses, the murmur of elite conversations, the occasional burst of laughter, all masking the undercurrent of tension he had so carefully engineered. Tonight wasn't just a celebration for the rich and powerful. Tonight was a night he would end Victoria's carefully constructed empire in front of everyone who mattered to her. He had waited for this moment for over a year. Every lie, every fake smile, every calculated move had led to this exact hour. He had inserted himself into her new world like a ghost, invisible yet always present, twisting the right screws until the whole machine began to fall apart. But Victoria didn't know the half of it yet. Across the room, she was radiant, draped in an emerald silk gown that seemed to catch the light with every turn. She was surrounded by her new husband, Marcus, tall, confident, still foolish enough to believe that he was the one in control, and a small crowd of investors and friends. They were laughing, sipping their wine, and talking about expansion plans of the real estate empire Marcus and Victoria had been building together. But Ethan knew something they didn't. The entire foundation of that empire was about to crumble. 2 months earlier, he had discovered the leverage he needed, buried deep in a chain of shell companies Marcus used to avoid certain taxes. Ethan didn't just uncover the fraud. He made sure it was traced in a way that pointed not just to Marcus, but directly to Victoria as well. If he had learned anything from their marriage, it was that she hated one thing more than losing money, losing her public image. He had leaked just enough whispers to the right people, ensuring suspicion was there before the real storm hit. And tonight the storm was coming. The first crack in the evening's perfection came when an older man in a tailored navy suit approached Marcus mid-conversation. Ethan recognized him instantly. Harold Crane, an influential board member and one of Marcus's biggest backers. His expression was tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Marcus," Harold said quietly but firmly, "we need to talk. Now." Marcus excused himself, clearly irritated, but when Harold leaned in to speak, the irritation drained from his face. Ethan could practically see the blood leave the man's skin as Harold handed him a small folder, the kind that never carried good news. Victoria's eyes flickered toward her husband, a subtle note of concern breaking through her polished facade. 5 minutes later, another man approached, this time a younger investor, phone in hand, his voice loud enough for several people to hear. "Victoria, is this true? Your name's all over this article." Heads began to turn. The murmur of gossip rose like a tide. Victoria tried to maintain her poise, but her hand tightened around her glass. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A single message from his contact. "It's live." He didn't even need to check. He knew exactly what they were seeing. A detailed expose linking Victoria and Marcus to fraudulent property deals, falsified documents, and laundering money through offshore accounts. Photos, emails, bank transfers. Every piece of evidence in perfect chronological order. The headlines would be everywhere by morning, but here, in this room, the damage was instant. People began to step away from Victoria, as if her fall from grace might be contagious. Marcus stormed back toward her, hissing something sharp into her ear. She replied just as fiercely, their smiles frozen in place of crowd. But the cracks were visible now. Ethan caught the faintest fragments of their words. "Who knew? You said it was safe." "It's over, Victoria." She scanned the crowd, and for the first time that night, her gaze found Ethan. For a moment, confusion crossed her face, as if trying to remember where she had seen him before. Then recognition dawned, and with it, shock. It had been years since the divorce, and he'd changed. Sharper suit, confident posture, eyes that no longer carried the hurt she'd once inflicted. But she knew. He raised his glass to her, slow and deliberate, a silent toast. Her lips parted, but whatever she meant to say was drowned out by the growing commotion as reporters, tipped off by Ethan an hour earlier, began to push through the doors, cameras flashing. The rest unfolded in chaos. Security tried to hold them back, but questions were shouted, microphones shoved forward. Marcus cursed. Victoria tried to flee toward the side exit, and Ethan simply stepped away, blending into the sea of guests making their way out. By morning, their faces were on every news channel. Arrest warrants would come within the week. Assets frozen. Reputation in ruins. Ethan didn't watch the coverage. He didn't need to. The victory wasn't in headlines. It was in the memory of her expression when she realized who had been standing in the shadows all along. He walked out into the cool night air, leaving the gala and her world burning behind him. For the first time in years, he felt free.